The morning of September 15th, 1991, started like any other for Linda Morrison, as she bundled her 18-month-old daughter Emma into her car seat. The autumn air in Portland, Oregon, carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. Linda worked as a dental hygienist at a busy downtown practice, and Sunshine Daycare on Hawthorne Boulevard had been caring for Emma for nearly 6 months. The facility had stellar reviews, and Mrs. Henderson, the elderly owner, treated each child as if they were her own grandchild. "Mama loves you, sweet pea," Linda whispered, pressing a kiss to Emma's soft blonde curls before handing her to Mrs. Henderson at 7:30 a.m. Emma giggled and reached for the colorful mobile hanging in the entrance, her blue eyes sparkling with innocent joy. It was the last time Linda would hold her daughter. If you're watching this story unfold, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. The call came at 2:47 p.m. Linda was cleaning a patient's teeth when the receptionist's voice crackled through the intercom, tight with urgency. "Linda, you need to take this call immediately." Mrs. Henderson's voice was barely recognizable through her sobs. "Linda, I don't know how to tell you this. Emma is missing. We've searched everywhere. The police are here. You need to come now." The dental office around Linda seemed to tilt and blur. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she stumbled toward her car, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the keys. Portland's familiar streets blurred past as she raced toward the daycare, her mind unable to process the impossible reality that her baby girl had simply vanished. The scene at Sunshine Daycare was chaos. Police cars lined the quiet residential street, their red and blue lights painting the Victorian houses in harsh, alternating colors. Detective Ray Martinez, a veteran investigator with kind eyes and graying temples, met Linda at the door. "Mrs. Morrison, I know this is devastating, but I need you to stay calm so we can find Emma. Can you tell me about this morning? Did anything seem unusual?" Linda's voice came out as a whisper. "Nothing. Everything was normal. Emma was happy, babbling about the ducks we saw at the park yesterday. Mrs. Henderson took her from me like always. She was wearing her little yellow dress with the sunflower buttons and her white sandals." Every detail felt crucial now, each memory a potential clue that might bring Emma home. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 70s who had run the daycare for over 20 years, sat in the corner of the playroom, her face ashen. "I've been caring for children since before you were born, Detective. Nothing like this has ever happened. We had our usual routine, breakfast, playtime. Then I put the children down for their afternoon nap around 1 p.m. When I went to wake them at 2:30, Emma's crib was empty. The window was still locked from the inside. The door to the nap room never left my sight." The investigation that followed consumed Portland's attention for months. Detective Martinez led a team that interviewed every parent, every neighbor, every person who had walked past the daycare in the preceding weeks. They discovered that the daycare's back gate, which opened onto a narrow alley, had a faulty latch that occasionally swung open in strong winds. On September 15th, Portland had experienced gusts up to 35 miles per hour. The gate was found open that afternoon, but no one could say when it had blown ajar. Security cameras were virtually non-existent in 1991, especially in residential neighborhoods. The few businesses with surveillance systems either had no footage from that day or cameras that didn't capture the relevant areas. It was as if Emma had simply evaporated from her crib during those 2 hours of nap time. Linda's world crumbled as days turned to weeks without answers. Her husband David, a carpenter who worked construction sites across the city, took leave to help with the search efforts. Their small apartment filled with missing person flyers, each bearing Emma's cherubic face and the heartbreaking words, "Missing, Emma Morrison, 18 months old, blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing yellow dress." They plastered the flyers on telephone poles, in grocery stores, at bus stops throughout Portland and the surrounding suburbs. The case generated massive media attention. Local news stations ran Emma's story nightly for weeks. The Portland Tribune published a series of investigative articles exploring every possible lead. Psychics called claiming visions, amateur detectives offered theories, and well-meaning strangers provided tips that led nowhere. Linda followed every lead personally, driving to remote locations based on reported sightings, knocking on doors of strangers who claimed they might have information. One particularly cruel false lead came 3 months after the disappearance. A woman in Seattle called police, claiming she had seen Emma at a shopping mall with a couple who didn't look like parents. Linda and David drove the 4-hour journey north through Oregon's rain-soaked forests, their hearts hammering with desperate hope. The couple turned out to be tourists from Vancouver with their own daughter, who bore only a passing resemblance to Emma. The crushing disappointment sent Linda into a depression that lasted months. Detective Martinez never gave up, even as other cases demanded his attention. He kept Emma's file on his desk, reviewing it regularly, following up on new tips even years later. "Some cases haunt you," he would tell colleagues. "That little girl's face, her mother's devastation. It changes you. I've seen a lot of terrible things, but the not knowing, that's the worst kind of torture for a family." And the psychological toll on Linda was immense. She quit her job, unable to concentrate on anything beyond finding Emma. David returned to work out of financial necessity, but their marriage began to fracture under the weight of their shared grief and Linda's obsession with the search. They attended support groups for families of missing children, where Linda met other mothers who understood the unique agony of loving someone who might be alive but unreachable. As years passed, the active search efforts diminished, but Linda never stopped hoping. She maintained relationships with other families of missing children, participated in awareness campaigns, and kept Emma's case alive in local media through anniversary stories. Every September 15, the Portland Tribune ran a brief update, keeping Emma's disappearance in public consciousness. The theories multiplied over time. Some investigators believed Emma had wandered out through the faulty gate and been taken by an opportunistic predator. Others suspected someone with inside knowledge of the daycare's routines had specifically targeted her. A few speculated about organized adoption rings that kidnapped young children to sell to childless couples. Each theory felt both possible and impossibly distant from the truth. Linda's hair turned gray prematurely. She developed anxiety that made leaving her apartment difficult. David, struggling with his own grief and Linda's deteriorating mental health, eventually moved out in 1995. Their divorce was quiet and sad. Two people who had loved each other but couldn't survive the loss of their child together. Linda kept their apartment, surrounding herself with Emma's toys and clothes, maintaining her daughter's room exactly as it had been on that September morning. Detective Martinez retired in 2005, but he passed Emma's case to Detective Sarah Chen, a young investigator who brought fresh energy and new techniques to cold cases. Chen ran Emma's fingerprints through updated databases, explored early internet networks for any mentions of the case, and reached out to other jurisdictions for similar disappearances. She found patterns: other children who had vanished from daycare facilities across the Pacific Northwest during the late 1980s and early 1990s, but no concrete connections. The advent of social media in the late 2000s gave Linda new tools for her search. She created Facebook pages dedicated to finding Emma, sharing age-progressed photos created by forensic artists. The images showed what Emma might look like as a teenager, then as a young woman. Blonde hair darkened to brown, blue eyes that might have remained bright and curious, a face that combined Linda's delicate features with David's strong jawline. Linda connected with other parents of missing children online, sharing strategies and supporting each other through the darkest moments. She learned about DNA databases and new forensic techniques that might someday provide answers. Hope became both her salvation and her torment. The belief that Emma was alive somewhere kept Linda going, but it also prevented her from finding peace. By 2015, Emma would have been 26 years old. Linda, now in her 60s and working part-time at a veterinary clinic, had never remarried. She lived quietly in the same neighborhood where Emma had disappeared, still believing that somehow, someday, her daughter would find her way home. The missing person flyers had long since faded from telephone poles, but Emma's case remained active in Portland police files. Detective Chen, now a seasoned investigator, still reviewed Emma's case annually. Advances in DNA technology had helped solve other cold cases from the same era, and Chen maintained hope that new evidence might surface. She had interviewed Mrs. Henderson multiple times before the elderly woman's death in 2010, had spoken with every daycare employee and parent from 1991, had chased down leads across multiple states. The case remained as baffling as ever. The breakthrough began with a seemingly unrelated incident in March 2024. A woman named Jessica Walsh was arrested for identity theft in Boise, Idaho. During routine fingerprinting, the system flagged an anomaly. Jessica's fingerprints existed in multiple databases under different names and birth dates. When investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Jessica had been living under assumed identities for over 15 years, using sophisticated forged documents to establish new lives in different cities. Under questioning, Jessica claimed she had been kidnapped as a small child and raised by people she knew weren't her biological parents. She had vague memories of a before time, a woman with gentle hands who sang lullabies, a room with yellow walls and dancing sunbeams. When she turned 18, her captors had told her the truth. She wasn't their biological daughter, and they couldn't legally adopt her because she had been taken illegally as a toddler. Terrified and confused, Jessica had run away, spending years trying to piece together her true identity while avoiding law enforcement. She had researched missing children cases online, but without knowing her real name or exact age, the search felt impossible. Fear of prosecution for the identity theft she had committed to survive kept her from reaching out to authorities. Detective Chen learned about Jessica's case through a network of investigators who worked cold cases involving missing persons. The timing was intriguing. A woman in her 30s, with memories of being kidnapped as a small child, with no clear documentation of her early life. Chen reached out to Boise police, requesting details about Jessica's case. When Chen saw Jessica's photograph, her breath caught. The woman bore a striking resemblance to the age-progressed images that forensic artists had created for Emma Morrison. The facial structure, the set of her eyes, even her posture in the police photos, reminded Chen of Linda. It was a long shot, but Chen had learned to trust her instincts over years of investigating missing person cases. The DNA comparison took 3 weeks to process. During that time, Chen prepared Linda for the possibility that they might finally have answers, while cautioning that many leads had disappointed them before. Linda, now 71, had learned to guard her heart against hope, but something about this felt different. Perhaps it was Chen's barely contained excitement, or the way the detective's voice carried a certainty that had been absent in previous updates. On April 18, 2024, Chen called Linda with the news that changed everything. "Linda, I need you to sit down. We have a match. Jessica Walsh is Emma. Your daughter is alive, and she wants to meet you." The reunion took place at Portland Police Headquarters on a grey April morning that felt thick with possibility. Linda arrived an hour early, her hands shaking as she sat in the conference room where she had spent so many hours over the past 33 years, providing statements and reviewing evidence. This time felt different. Instead of searching for Emma, Emma was coming to her. When Jessica walked through the door, Linda's knees nearly buckled. The woman before her had Emma's eyes, the same bright blue that had sparkled with joy in that final memory at the daycare. Her hair was darker now, brown with blonde highlights, and her face had matured into elegant lines that combined features Linda recognized from her own mirror, with characteristics she could only assume came from David's genetics. "Mom." Jessica's voice was tentative, years of uncertainty evident in the single word. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, wondering if Linda would accept her, if she would recognize her, if the woman she remembered from fragments of dreams was real. Linda closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps, wrapping Jessica in an embrace that felt like exhaling after holding her breath for over 3 decades. "Emma, my Emma, I never stopped looking for you." The words came through tears that had been waiting 33 years to fall. The story that emerged over the following weeks was complex and heartbreaking. Jessica's captors, Thomas and Margaret Hartley, had been a childless couple living in rural Washington who had become desperate after years of failed fertility treatments and rejected adoption applications. Thomas worked as a handyman who had done repairs at Sunshine Daycare several months before Emma's disappearance, giving him knowledge of the facility's routines and the faulty back gate. On September 15, 1991, Margaret had waited in the alley behind the daycare during nap time, knowing that the gate often blew open in strong winds. When it did, she had simply walked into the yard, entered through the unlocked back door, and taken Emma from her crib. The entire kidnapping had taken less than 5 minutes. They had immediately driven to a remote cabin in the Cascade Mountains, where they kept Emma hidden for nearly a year while they established new identities and relocated to Montana. The Hartleys had raised Emma as their own daughter, calling her Jessica and creating elaborate stories about her early childhood to explain why she had no memory of being a baby. They homeschooled her to avoid the scrutiny that might come with enrolling her in public school systems. When Emma began asking questions about her missing early memories and the inconsistencies in their stories, they convinced her that she had been traumatized by the death of her real parents in a car accident and that forgetting was her mind's way of protecting her. Thomas had died in 2018, and Margaret, suffering from dementia, was now in a care facility in Helena, Montana. She had confessed to the kidnapping during a moment of clarity when detectives interviewed her, expressing remorse, but claiming they had given Emma a loving home that she wouldn't have had otherwise. "The twisted logic of child abductors," Chen explained to Linda. "They convince themselves they're rescuing children rather than destroying families." Jessica struggled with complex emotions about her captors. Despite learning the truth about her origins, she had genuine love for the people who had raised her, even as she grappled with the devastation their actions had caused. They had been kind to her, had provided education and care, had told her they loved her daily. Learning that her entire childhood had been built on a crime that had tortured another woman for decades created a psychological upheaval that required professional counseling. Linda faced her own emotional challenges in rebuilding a relationship with the daughter she had lost as a toddler. Jessica was a stranger who happened to share her DNA, a grown woman with her own life, relationships, and perspectives shaped by experiences Linda hadn't shared. The reunion wasn't the simple restoration of their family that Linda had imagined during her darkest moments. It was the beginning of building something entirely new. David, now living in Sacramento with a second wife and 2 teenage sons, flew to Portland when he learned that Emma had been found. The meeting between Jessica and her biological father was awkward and emotional. David had processed his grief differently than Linda, eventually accepting that Emma was probably dead and moving forward with his life. Discovering that she was alive reopened wounds he thought had healed and created complicated feelings about the life he had built in her absence. The media attention surrounding Emma's case became intense once news of the reunion broke. Portland news stations covered the story extensively. National networks picked up the human interest angle, and true crime podcasts devoted episodes to analyzing the kidnapping. Linda, who had courted media attention during the early years of Emma's disappearance, now found the scrutiny overwhelming. She wanted to protect Jessica's privacy and give them space to rebuild their relationship away from public curiosity. Jessica chose to keep her adopted name while also embracing her identity as Emma Morrison. The legal complexities of restoring her true identity took months to resolve, involving birth certificates, social security records, and documentation that had been falsified for over 30 years. She had been working as a graphic designer in Denver, living a quiet life under one of her assumed identities, when her arrest for identity theft had ultimately led her home. The healing process was gradual and complicated. Linda had spent 33 years frozen in grief, unable to move forward without knowing Emma's fate. Jessica had built an adult life, believing she was someone else entirely, with career goals, friendships, and romantic relationships that predated learning her true identity. They attended family counseling together, working with specialists who understood the unique trauma of family reunification after long-term separation. Detective Chen closed Emma Morrison's case file on a rainy October morning in 2024, 33 years and 1 month after it had been opened. Margaret Hartley was charged with kidnapping, though her advanced dementia made prosecution complicated. The case had consumed significant resources over 3 decades, involving dozens of investigators, thousands of tips, and countless hours of police work. Chen reflected on how advances in technology, DNA databases, improved fingerprint systems, interagency communication, had finally provided the breakthrough that old-fashioned detective work hadn't achieved. For Linda, the resolution brought complex emotions. Relief that Emma was alive and safe, battled with anger about the lost decades, the destroyed family, the years of agonizing uncertainty. Therapy helped her process the trauma of both Emma's disappearance and her return. She had to mourn the child Emma had been and embrace the adult Jessica had become, while also confronting her own choices during the years of searching, relationships she had sacrificed, opportunities she had missed, the life she had put on hold. Jessica, worked to understand her place in both families. She maintained contact with the Hartley relatives who had known her as Jessica, while building new relationships with Linda's extended family. She met aunts, uncles, and cousins who remembered the baby Emma and welcomed the adult Jessica with careful warmth. The complexity of loving people who had participated in her kidnapping, even unknowingly, created ongoing emotional challenges. As 2024 drew to a close, Linda and Jessica had established a routine of weekly phone calls and monthly visits. They were strangers learning to be family, taking small steps toward understanding each other. Linda had returned to full-time work, finding purpose in victim advocacy and supporting other families of missing children. Jessica continued her career in graphic design while writing a book about her experience, hoping to help other survivors of long-term kidnapping. The Portland house, where Linda had waited for 33 years, became a place of healing rather than grief. Emma's childhood bedroom was transformed into a guest room, where Jessica stayed during visits, filled with photos spanning both their lives, pictures of baby Emma alongside images of Jessica's childhood, graduation photos, career achievements, and new memories they were creating together. Detective Chen often thought about the case that had defined much of her career, She had learned that solving cold cases required persistence, technology, luck, and the recognition that resolution didn't always mean happy endings. Families reunited after decades of separation faced unique challenges that required ongoing support and understanding. The criminal justice system struggled to address crimes that spanned multiple decades and involved complex psychological manipulation. The story of Emma Morrison's disappearance and recovery became a case study in police academies and social work programs. It highlighted the importance of maintaining active investigations in missing person cases, the need for improved interagency communication, and the long-term trauma experienced by families of missing children. Sunshine Daycare's location became a small memorial garden, maintained by the neighborhood as a reminder of the child who vanished and the woman who returned. On September 15, 2024, exactly 33 years after Emma's disappearance, Linda and Jessica visited the memorial garden together. They placed flowers and stood in quiet reflection, acknowledging the tragedy that had shaped both their lives while celebrating their reunion. Other families of missing children joined them, creating an informal support network born from shared experience. The date no longer marked the anniversary of loss, but rather the beginning of a different kind of journey. Linda had learned that some wounds never fully heal, but that healing can take forms beyond simple restoration. Jessica had discovered that identity is more complex than names or birth certificates, shaped by experiences, choices, and the ongoing work of understanding who we are and who we choose to become. Their story continued beyond the dramatic reunion into the quieter work of building a relationship between two women who shared blood but had lived entirely different lives. It was a story about the enduring power of maternal love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the way hope can sustain us through even the darkest chapters of our lives. Emma Morrison had vanished as a toddler in 1991, but Jessica Walsh had returned as an adult in 2024, bringing with her the possibility that some stories, no matter how tragic, can still find their way to healing.